The Ideal of Human Unity, Chapter 31. The Conditions of a Free World Union. A free world union must, in its very nature, be a complex unity, based on diversity, and that diversity must be based on free self-determination. A mechanical Unitarian system would regard, in its idea, the geographical groupings of men as so many conveniences for provincial division, for the convenience of administration, much in the same spirit as the French Revolution reconstituted France with an entire disregard of old natural and historic divisions. It would regard mankind as one single nation, and it would try to efface the old separative national spirit altogether. It would arrange its system probably by continents, and subdivide the continents by convenient geographical demarcations. In this other quite opposite idea, the geographical, the physical principle of union would be subordinated to a psychological principle. For not a mechanical division, but a living diversity would be its object. If this object is to be secured, the peoples of humanity must be allowed to group themselves according to their free will and their natural affinities. No constraint or force could be allowed to compel an unwilling nation or distinct grouping of peoples to enter into another system, or join itself, or remain joined to it for the convenience, aggrandizement, or political necessity of other people, or even for the general convenience in disregard of its own wishes. Nations or countries widely divided from each other geographically, like England and Canada or England and Australia, might cohere together. Nations closely grouped locally might choose to stand apart, like England and Ireland, or like Finland and Russia. Unity would be the largest principle of life, but freedom would be its foundation stone. Footnote: necessarily to every principle there must be in application a reasonable limit. Otherwise, fantastic and impracticable absurdities might take the place of a living truth. End footnote. In a world built on the present political and commercial basis, this system of groupings might present often insuperable difficulties or serious disadvantages. But in the condition of things in which alone a free world union would be possible, these difficulties and disadvantages would cease to operate. Military necessity of forced union for strength of defense or for power of aggression would be non-existent, because war would no longer be possible. Force, as the arbiter of international differences, and a free world union are two quite incompatible ideas, and practically could not coexist. The political necessity would also disappear, for it is largely made up of that very spirit of conflict and the consequent insecure conditions of international life, apportioning predominance in the world to the physically and organically strongest nations, out of which the military necessity arose. In a free world union, determining its affairs and settling its differences by agreement or, where agreement failed, by arbitration, the only political advantage of including large masses of men, not otherwise allied to each other in a single state, would be the greater influence arising from mass and population. But this influence could not work if the inclusion were against the will of the nations brought together in the state, for then it would rather be a source of weakness and disunion in the state's international action, unless, indeed, it were allowed in the international system to weigh by its bulk and population, without regard to the will and opinion of the peoples constituting it. Thus, the population of Finland and Poland might swell the number of voices which a united Russia could count in the Council of the Nations, but the will, sentiment, and opinions of the Finns and Poles be given no means of expression in that mechanical and unreal unity. Footnote: the inclusion of India in the League of Nations has evidently been an arrangement of this type. End footnote. But this would be contrary to the modern sense of justice and reason, and incompatible with the principle of freedom, which could alone ensure a sound and peaceful basis for the world arrangement. Thus, the elimination of war and the settlement of differences by peaceful means would remove the military necessity for forced unions, while the right of every people to a free voice and status in the world would remove its political necessity and advantage. The elimination of war and the recognition of the equal rights of all peoples are intimately bound up with each other. That interdependence, admitted for a moment, even though imperfectly, during the European conflict, will have to be permanently accepted if there is to be any unification of the race. The economic question remains, and it is the sole important problem of a vital and physical order, which might possibly present in this kind of world arrangement any serious difficulties, or in which the advantages of a unitarian system might really outweigh those of this more complex unity. In either, however, the forcible economic exploitation of one nation by another, which is so large a part of the present economic order, would necessarily be abolished. There would remain the possibility of a sort of peaceful economic struggle, a separativeness, a building up of artificial barriers, a phenomenon which has been a striking and more prominent feature of the present commercial civilization. But it is likely that once the element of struggle were removed from the political field, the stress of the same struggle in the economic field would greatly decrease. The advantages of self-sufficiency and predominance, to which political rivalry and struggle and the possibility of hostile relations now give an enormous importance, would lose much of their stringency, and the advantages of a freer give and take would become more easily visible. It is obvious, for example, that an independent Finland would profit much more by encouraging the passage of Russian commerce through Finnish ports, or an Italian Trieste by encouraging the passage of the commerce of the present Austrian provinces than by setting up a barrier between itself and its natural feeders. An Ireland, politically or administratively independent, able to develop its agricultural and technical education and intensification of productiveness, would find a greater advantage in sharing the movement of the commerce of Great Britain than in isolating itself, even as Great Britain would profit more by an agreement with such an Ireland than by keeping her a poor and starving helot on her estate. Throughout the world, the idea and fact of union, once definitely prevailing, unity of interest would be more clearly seen, and the greater advantages of agreement and mutual participation in a naturally harmonized life over the feverish artificial prosperity created by a stressing of separative barriers. That stressing is inevitable in an order of struggle and international competition. It would be seen to be prejudicial in an order of peace and union, which would make for mutual accommodation. The principle of a free world union, being that of the settlement of common affairs by common agreement, this could not be confined to the removal of political differences and the arrangement of political relations alone, but must naturally extend to economic differences and economic relations as well. To the removal of war and the recognition of the right of self-determination of the peoples, the arrangement of the economic life of the world in its new order by mutual and common agreement would have to be added as the third condition of a free union. There remains the psychological question of the advantage to the soul of humanity, to its culture, to its intellectual, moral, aesthetic, spiritual growth. At present, the first great need of the psychological life of humanity is the growth towards a greater unity, but its need is that of a living unity, not in the externals of civilization, in dress, manners, habits of life, details of political, social, and economic order, not a uniformity, which is the unity towards which the mechanical age of civilization has been driving, but a free development everywhere with a constant, friendly interchange, a close understanding, a feeling of our common humanity, its great common ideals, and the truths towards which it is striving, and a certain unity and correlation of effort in the united human advance. At present, it may seem that this is better helped and advanced by many different nations and cultures living together in one political state union than by their political separateness. Temporarily, this may be true to a certain extent, but let us see within what limits. The old psychological argument for the forcible inclusion of a subject nation by a dominant people was the right or advantage of imposing a superior civilization upon one that was inferior or upon a barbarous race. Thus the Welsh and Irish people used to be told that their subjugation was a great blessing to their countries, their languages petty patois, which ought to disappear as soon as possible, and in embracing English speech, English institutions, English ideas, lay their sole road to civilization, culture, and prosperity. The British domination in India was justified by the priceless gift of British civilization and British ideals, to say nothing of the one and only true religion, Christianity, to a heathen, orientally benighted and semi-barbarous nation. All this is now an exploded myth. We can see clearly enough that the long suppression of the Celtic spirit and Celtic culture, superior in spirituality, if inferior in certain practical directions to the Latin and Teutonic, was a loss not only to the Celtic peoples, but to the world. India has vehemently rejected the pretensions to superiority of British civilization, culture, and religion, while still admitting not so much the British as the modern ideals and methods in politics and in the trend to a greater social equality. And it is becoming clear now, even to the more well-informed European minds, that the Anglicization of India would have been a wrong, not only to India itself, but to humanity. Still, it may be said that, if the old principle of the association was wrong, yet the association itself leads eventually to a good result. If Ireland has lost, for the most part, its old national speech, and Wales has ceased to have a living literature, yet as a large compensation, the Celtic spirit is now reviving and putting its stamp on the English tongue, spoken by millions throughout the world. And the inclusion of the Celtic countries in the British Empire may lead to the development of an Anglo-Celtic life and culture, better for the world than the separate development of the two elements. India, by the partial possession of the English language, has been able to link herself to the life of the modern world, and to reshape her literature, life, and culture on a larger basis. And now that she is reviving her own spirit and ideals in a new mold, is producing an effect on the thought of the West, a perpetual union of the two countries, and a constant mutual interaction of their culture by this close association would be more advantageous to them and to the world than their cultural isolation from each other in a separate existence. There is a temporary apparent truth in this idea, though it is not the whole truth of the position, and we have given it full weight. In considering the claims of the imperialistic solution or line of advance on the way to unity. But even the elements of truth in it can only be admitted provided a free and equal union replaces the present abnormal, irritating, and falsifying relations. Moreover, these advantages could only be valuable as a stage towards a greater unity, in which this close association would no longer be of the same importance. For the final end is a common world culture, in which each national culture should be not merged into or fused with some other culture differing from it in principle or temperament, but evolved to its full power and could then profit to that end by all the others, as well as give its gains and influences to them, all serving by their separateness and their interaction the common aim and idea of human perfection. This would best be served not by separateness and isolation, of which there would be no danger, but yet by a certain distinctness and independence of life, not subordinated to the mechanizing force of an artificial unity. Even within the independent nation itself, there might be with advantage a tendency towards greater local freedom of development and variation, a sort of return to the vivid local and regional life of ancient Greece and India and medieval Italy. For the disadvantages of strife, political weakness, and precariousness of the nation's independence would no longer exist in a condition of things from which the old terms of physical conflict had been excluded, while all the cultural and psychological advantages might be recovered. A world secure of its peace and freedom might freely devote itself to the intensification of its real human powers of life by the full encouragement and flowering of the individual, local, regional, national mind and power in the firm frame of a united humanity. What precise form the framework might take, it is impossible to forecast and useless to speculate. Only certain now current ideas would have to be modified or abandoned. The idea of a world parliament is attractive at first sight, because the parliamentary form is that to which our minds are accustomed. But an assembly of the present Unitarian national type could not be the proper instrument of a free world union of this large and complex kind. It could only be the instrument of a Unitarian world state. The idea of a world federation, if by that be understood the Germanic or American form, would be equally inappropriate to the greater diversity and freedom of national development, which this type of world union would hold as one of its cardinal principles. Rather, some kind of confederation of the peoples for common human ends, for the removal of all causes of strife and difference, for the interrelation and the regulation of mutual aid and interchange, yet leaving to each unit a full internal freedom and power of self-determination, would be the right principle of this unity. But since this is a much looser unity, what would prevent the spirit of separativeness and the causes of clash and difference from surviving in so powerful a form as to endanger the endurance of the larger principle of oneness? Even if that spirit and those causes at all allowed it to reach some kind of sufficient fulfillment? The Unitarian ideal, on the contrary, seeks to efface these opposite tendencies in their forms and even in their root cause, and by so doing would seem to ensure an enduring union. But it may be pointed out in answer that if it is by political ideas and machinery, under the pressure of the political and economic spirit, that the unity is brought about, that is to say, by the idea and experience of the material advantages, conveniences, well-being secured by unification, then the Unitarian system also could not be sure of durability. For in the constant mutability of the human mind and earthly circumstances, as long as life is active, new ideas and changes are inevitable. The suppressed desire to recover the lost element of variability, separateness, independent living might well take advantage of them for what would then be considered as a wholesome and necessary reaction. The lifeless unity accomplished would dissolve from the pressure of the need of life within, as the Roman unity dissolved by its lifelessness in helpless response to a pressure from without, and once again local, regional, national egoism would reconstitute for itself fresh forms and new centers. On the other hand, in a free world union, though originally starting from the national basis, the national idea might be expected to undergo a radical transformation. It might even disappear into a new and less strenuously compact form and idea of group aggregation, which would not be separative in spirit, yet would preserve the necessary element of independence and variation needed by both individual and grouping for their full satisfaction and their healthy existence. Moreover, by emphasizing the psychological quite as much as the political and mechanical idea and basis, it would give a freer and less artificial form and opportunity for the secure development of the necessary intellectual and psychological change. For such an inner change could alone give some chance of durability to the unification. That change would be the growth of the living idea or religion of humanity. For only so could there come the psychological modification of life and feeling and outlook, which would accustom both individual and group to live in their common humanity first and most, subduing their individual and group egoism, yet losing nothing of their individual or group power to develop and express in its own way the divinity in man, which, once the race was assured of its material existence, would emerge as the true object of human existence.